Good evening, and welcome to the November 2021 One WILPF Zoom call. So glad you could join us. I'm Sandy Thacker from the East Bay, California branch. Also on our call are Mary Beth Gardam from Iowa City, Iowa, and Nancy Price from Davis, California. Our technical support teammate is Ellen Thomas from the mountains of North Carolina. Ann Henney from the East Bay, California branch will be joining us a bit later. This Zoom meeting happens every second Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and is sponsored by Women's International League for Peace and Freedom U.S. section. This is a public call. We're video recording, and the video will be posted in just a few days to WILPF's YouTube channel and our One WILPF call webpage. The link is in the chat and on the text pad. I wanted to thank people, for actually signing up to the WILPF YouTube channel. I think we got enough people now that we are more official. WILPF US is a sisterhood, though we welcome male members too. These monthly connections to one another keep us strong across the United States. For those who don't know, WILPF is the oldest women's international peace organization in the world. Founded in 1915 by Jane Addams of Hull House. There are over 30 WILPF branches in the United States, and we are one of 50 sections around the world. You can find out more and join us at our website, www.wilpfus.org/join. That is also on the text pad. Please remain muted when you're not speaking to reduce background noise. We'll post the agenda in the chat. There is also a Google Doc text pad where you can add information under the red line. The link to that text pad is in the chat. I'm not going to read it, it's way too long, so look in the chat. Please enter your name and location in the chat. Later on, the chat is also where you'll post questions to any of our speakers. To make your questions easier to find, please type questions in caps. Mary Beth?
Hi, everybody. Good evening from Iowa City, Iowa. I'm just putting that chat link, the Google Doc into the chat. It should be editable for everyone. Before we move on to tonight's speakers, we want to honor the fact that today is November 11th, Armistice Day, a day of remembrance for those brave men and women who fought and died for our country. Earlier today, WILPF US issued a statement about our recent opposition to the military draft, expanding it to women. We hope our members read the statement and will consider it. It will be controversial for some women's rights activists, but it is the considered statement of our peace women and the Disarm Committee. Here in WILPF, we also recognize those men and women who dedicated their lives to the hope of ending war and nuclear weapons. And this past month, we lost two remarkable women who had spent enormous amounts of energy and dedication to realize their goals for peace. Sister Megan Rice and Marge Van Cleef. Ellen Thomas, co-chair of the Disarm Committee, will speak briefly about Sister Megan, then Sister Tina, then Tina Shelton, leader of the Greater Philadelphia branch of WILPF, will speak briefly about Marge Van Cleef. Ellen, go ahead.
Hello, Sister Megan Rice was a friend of mine, and I met her in Las Vegas in 2009 when I was doing the first Nuclear Free Future tour for WILPF, and stayed at the compound that they had for the people who were promoting the anti-testing and anti-Creech drone activities And I also went to her trial for the Kings Bay plowshares. And I stayed at the place that she lived in Washington, D.C. when I went to visit there. And she was the most beautiful woman in her spirit that I think that I've ever known. She was angelic. She was saintly, and she was very real. And she is much missed by her many friends. She was part of the Atlantic Life community, which is made up of Catholic workers from all over, but particularly the eastern part of the United States. And I miss her personally. She's a gentle soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. What an amazing life she had. Sister Megan's contributions remind us how far we've come and how far we still have to go towards peace. Tina Shelton, can you share briefly your remembrance of Marge?
Is Tina here?
I don't see her.
Okay. Well, let me just say that Marge Van Cleef was extremely active and very knowledgeable. She had made a life study, really, of opposition to drones and automatic weapons, robotic agents of war. And she brought a huge amount of information to WILPF and was a tireless activist. Ellen, I hope that you're admitting people as they show up, because I can't see it while I'm screen sharing.
Everybody is coming in automatically. I've disabled the waiting room.
Okay, great. So our work for peace is a long journey, and we're called to continue, even if we don't get to see the results of our work in our lifetime. It's time our patriotism includes those who honor veterans by working to end wars and conflicts and the greed that fuels them. Marge and Sister Megan, best in power. This month is Indigenous Peoples Month, which guided us to our subject for tonight. But in fact, many of us have been watching the work of attorney Frank Bibeau on behalf of the White Earth band Ojibwe in Minnesota. I hope Frank has joined us. I sent him many reminders. Perhaps if he wasn't here, he designated someone else to speak for him. If so, please speak up. The Ojibwe are pursuing a lawsuit to challenge the rights of the Enbridge Pipeline Company to steal millions and millions of gallons of public water for their planned Line 3 pipeline route, depriving and polluting life-sustaining water from the treaty-protected rights of the tribe's sacred wild rice crop. Rice grows in water and requires clean water in abundance. This trial is one of only a couple in the country that has insisted on the rights of nature over the rights of corporate profit. As Indigenous Environmental Network activist Casey Camp Horinek says, we are not humans defending nature, we are nature protecting herself. If Mr. Bibeau is here, would you unmute yourself and speak?
I don't believe he is.
Okay, well, then I'm going to ask Nancy Price, who's the chair of our Earth Democracy Committee, to speak about this trial, what she knows about it, and the activism of the Ojibwe, White Earth Ojibwe, on this and other rights of nature issues. And Sikowis Nobiss is our other speaker for tonight. Sikowis, if you are knowledgeable about this and want to contribute, please unmute yourself and do so. But let's start with Nancy.
Nancy?
Yes, hello everybody and welcome. It's so nice to see so many joining us. Well, I can hardly speak authoritatively for all that has the white band, White
Earth Band, Ojibwe.
Yes, Ojibwe have been dealing with over the many years. The first time I really became acquainted with their struggle to have the rights of nature recognized was when I was researching Monsanto, the chemical corporation that was seeking to genetically engineer wild rice to then proceed to domesticate it and ensure that they had patent rights to this new variety of wild rice. And that became quite an effort that that many of us were engaged in knowing about and organizing against. And actually just today, I was researching the status of that, and I actually can't tell you, I think that genetic engineering and patenting effort was rebuffed. I was particularly interested because I live here in Davis, where Monsanto, now Monsanto Bayer, has been entrenched at the University of California, Davis for many, many years, along with the Gates Foundation, in funding genetic engineering research, GMO research, and influencing agricultural policy, particularly the Gates Foundation, particularly in Africa. As we know, water is a precious, life-giving gift of Mother Nature, and we need to protect and access to it so that not only nature, but all species can thrive and survive. Water is used in fracking in many different ways. It becomes polluted by the various chemicals that are used in fracking and contaminates the underground water table. And also, as it comes back up as wastewater, has to be dealt with. I think that this lawsuit against Line 3 is really important, not only to assert the tribal rights, but to make the claim about the rights of nature and to carry forward this indigenous claim, as well as to create the understanding of the rights of nature and to create a thriving rights of nature movement in this country. A number of years ago, the Alliance for Democracy that I happen to co-chair at this moment had passed 3 rights of nature resolutions in New Hampshire and Maine to oppose the taking of local water for commercial bottled water activities. And I've been following the rights of nature movement for quite a while. Now in Glasgow at COP26, the Women's Environmental and Climate Action Network has been held a couple of days ago, a Rights of Nature Tribunal, and today they were to announce their judgment, but I haven't seen that posted yet. But it will be very interesting because in one of the 2 cases, they were looking at the destruction of the Amazon and the assault on indigenous tribes there. And so it will be very interesting to see, to read about not only the testimony, but the outcome of the judgment. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nancy. My goodness, to jump in and give us so much information about what's going on. We really appreciate it. It's wonderful to have someone in WILPF who can explain these things so clearly. So thank you very much, Nancy. Turning our attention to our second speaker, we continue the theme of First Peoples' defense of our precious resources and their use of ritual and ceremony to root themselves in sacred places and the land that was stolen from them. It's not coincidental that we examine these topics in the same month our white culture marks the historical lie of Thanksgiving. Sikowis Nobiss of Great Plains Action Society is with us to talk about the contrast between the facts of history and the whitewashed version of this holiday that we've been taught. Welcome, Sikowis, and thank you for sharing your perspective with us. We'd like to know more about your work, and we're trying to learn more about how to be effective allies to Indigenous and tribal people by confronting the truth and reframing this holiday.
Hi, Kitatomahin, Tansi, Mio, Tagwasin, hello. Thank you, hello, and good evening. It's really nice to be speaking again with the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom. I think I spoke with you guys, geez, was it 3 months now, I think ago, with my cousin about the residential school horrors that our people have faced. So yes, it is a good month to discuss this issue, first foods in particular, and colonial capitalist farming practices and the effects that these practices are having on our earth. It is too bad Frank couldn't be here because it would have been a nice connection to have him speak about the rights of nature and the rights of the wild rice. And then I could speak about the big ag, which is another huge aspect of what's happening to the land. So how much time do I have?
Well, originally you had about 12 minutes, but without Frank, you've got a lot more time.
Okay, so okay, so I will be done, I guess, around 6:35. Is that a good amount of time?
Sure, that sounds fine.
Okay, great.
And maybe Frank will join us. Maybe he's just running late. Let's hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on up there right now, so I completely understand. I am going to start by giving you a perspective about big ag in Iowa. Now, we can talk about all sorts of, is there any way to turn the dinging off? Just curious. I don't know if there is, but if there is, that would be really helpful. So we can talk about first foods in many different ways. We can talk about what's happening to first foods and to the land in many different ways as well. Of course, pipeline construction is a very unwanted projects because of the danger that they bring with them, for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, we're trying to move away from fossil fuels. It's just perpetuation of an industry that just needs to be gone. It also, it's also, it goes into, lands, some of them very sacred territories, and it digs things up. We don't want that as well. And then right now, as we know, this Line 3 pipeline is going through, wild rice beds, which is, devastating. But the biggest issue that we would have with pipelines when it comes to our environment and places we're trying to protect is, what happens if these things leak, right? I mean, the results are, devastating. But what happens if they don't leak, right? So like we're fighting, when we fight pipelines, we are fighting for like many, many good reasons. But the one thing that I feel like that is going really under the radar, that is truly devastating our environment, and probably the number one contributor to climate change, is big ag or agribusiness, or corporate, agriculture. It's so much more insidious and dangerous than people want to admit. And I feel like there needs to be a lot more pressure. There needs to be a lot more protests. There needs to be a lot more conversation about like this particular industry. I'm going to talk about Iowa, well, because I'm in Iowa, and it's because it's the place that I've done a lot of research of, and it's where I focus my work. And because Iowa is, in my opinion, it's big ag's sacrifice zone. It is the place in this country, I think, that has been completely devastated by the effects of colonial capitalist farming practices, and that should have, frankly, a magnifying glass put on it so we can see exactly like what it's doing, because propaganda has made it so that it's considered a very family orientated, very good practice, when it's not. Iowa is the most biologically colonized state in the entire country. 90% of it has been given over to agricultural practices. Well, not 90%, but a majority of it. And then the other small percentage goes towards, like urban centers, road construction, golf courses, actually, as well. Iowa has the most golf courses per capita in the nation. So, but the majority of the land in Iowa is being used for colonial capitalist farming practices, meaning that beyond just the practices of the small farmer, which in and of themselves are still not good, or have not been good. There's like corporate conglomerates that are buying up this land like really quickly, and faster than you can imagine, and planting GMO crops like everywhere, monocropped like just everywhere in Iowa. Iowa used to be Iowa is the only state that is bordered by like the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers, and it's very unique in that aspect. I mean, these are the two biggest rivers in the nation, and they both funnel down to the Gulf of Mexico. Like they harbor like a majority of the water in this nation, and they're so important. And yet, unfortunately, they border Iowa, which is a state that lives in perpetual what's the word I'm trying to look for? They don't want to see what's going on. They don't want to see what's going on, and it's because corporate interest and economic growth, basically money, means more to this administration than the health and safety of the land and the people. So it used to transition from beautiful woodland to oak savanna, and marsh, and then to tall grass prairie. 80% of Iowa was tall grass prairie, as you went further west. And it had as much biological diversity as many rainforests have. But now, the Iowa Prairie Network tells us that that biological diversity is more comparable to that of a desert, because we've lost so many species here. They've moved out essentially, and or they're not here with us anymore. And that's because the habitat has collapsed for them. There are stories about like ducks that can't necessarily fly across, the state because there's no food for them. I mean, it's kind of like it's like a dead ground. And the only reason we are able to continue to produce here is because of massive doses of fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, basically human-made chemicals to get things to continue to grow. And that's really sad. I know everybody here has probably heard the story about the bugs, like where are the bugs, where have they gone? And they have reduced in number greatly here, over these past however many years you want to imagine. We can imagine, before, the Industrial Revolution, that maybe, of course, there was much less machinery and pesticides and herbicides being used. And then now we've transitioned into, basically all of that. And so, there's like a loss of even bugs in this state. People talk about their windshields having less of that when they drive. And so it's there. There's the animals suffer. The amount of state parks here can be, if you put them together, I think they would make up about 9 square miles. And then of all those parks, I think only about like 0.5% is actually dedicated to preserving, biodiversity, which doesn't make any sense because biodiversity needs room to move. You can't necessarily contain it. And so there's a movement here in Iowa called the Rewilding Movement, where people are trying to at least create corridors for animals so they can travel. Because there's no point in just giving them these little spots, because animals move, and they end up in trouble if they move out of these zones, these protected zones. So not only have we lost animals here, we've lost the soil. The UN tells us that we only have about 60 harvests left of soil, in the world. And then, Iowa, I think, would be even is in more trouble, frankly. The planting of the removal of tall grass prairie removes the roots that can be as much as 8 feet deep. So not only do these roots, keep everything in place, like the soil, but they also contain, ridiculous amounts of carbon. And so when you take this out, you are left with, loose ground, and, massive releases of carbon, and then an inability to, sequester that carbon. So we're not doing ourselves any favors with that. And so, with increased weather events because of the climate crisis, we have really hard rainfalls happening, and the soil is just basically being washed into our waterways and going downstream. So we're at loss for animal habitat, and so animals have left us. We're losing our soil. We've lost first foods that were actually farmed here, essentially, before colonizers came in to the land. When colonizers, came here, Indigenous peoples had been, cultivating, plants for thousands of years. I think they'd been growing corn for at least 1,000 years at this point. Sunflower, barley, goosefoot, sumpweed, knotweed, maygrass, gourds and squashes, again, corn, like I just mentioned, beans, tobacco, and more, and so the way that Indigenous peoples farm though was in contrast to, these very, I don't know, strict concepts of putting things in rows and, I don't know, tilling, so on and so forth. And so, it wasn't really considered farming in the eyes of the colonizers. So it was uncivilized. And there's stories. There's a quote by a native man. Oh, what's his name now? What's his name? Hold on, give me 1 second. He was out in the Northwest, and he founded the Dreamer religion. And he was told that he had to farm, because for a long time, bringing Native people to farm, forcing them to farm essentially, was what a lot of colonizers considered to be civilizing them, because they wanted to move them away from their savage lifestyles of hunting, and well, I don't like to use these terms like hunting and gathering, because like we didn't just hunt and gather, like we did farm, we did cultivate, and it, yes, we hunted, but it's much more complicated than just that. And so they essentially didn't want us to do what we did, what was considered our lifestyle, like it was just not okay. So they forced a lot of Native people into farming. And there were those that were like, this is not our way. And that's it. His name is Smahala. And so he's Nibipu, which is also known as the Nez Perce. They are out in Oregon, and they were being forced into farming out there at that point. And he founded the Dreamer religion, and the Dreamer religion was essentially this was built on an ideology that the white man had to leave. The one day white men would be gone from these lands. And so when asked to farm, he said, or to plow the ground, he said, "You asked me to plow the ground. Shall I take a knife and tear my mother's breast? Then when I die, she will take me to her bosom to rest. You asked me to dig for stone. Shall I dig under her skin for her bones? Then when I die, I cannot enter her body to be born again. You asked me to cut grass and make hay and sell it and be rich like the white man. But how dare I cut off my mother's hair?" And what I found really profound with this quote was when he's told to plow, and he's like, why would I tear into my mother's breast? Because the idea of tilling was just not something that was practiced, obviously within many Indigenous communities on Turtle Island. And yet tilling is has been a really big deal. I mean, we have massive machines that are made, specifically to till the ground. But what people have been finding now with, the rise of organic farming, permaculture, turning back to Indigenous peoples to see how we did things, is that tilling is really not that great. It creates like a very I don't know, how would you say it? It mixes everything, and it creates a very porous clump, and so that the water runs through it really quickly. And then tilling also makes it so that it's much easier for soil to be removed. And so now we have no-till farming, and it just it's too bad that people didn't want to listen to Indigenous practices and ways of being back then, because here we are now. We are basically like at, I would consider, at the end of the line here, in terms of what this environment can do. I mean, like it's collapsing around us. Right now, like as I speak, things are not doing well here. And so, we have to, turn our gaze to big ag, these corporate conglomerates like Bayer and Monsanto, and to the government, because the government sanctions everything that happens here. The government creates a story that makes people think that it's okay that that this is happening. Oh my goodness, it's 6:35 already. I'm gonna just take 5 more minutes. Is that fine?
You have plenty of time.
Okay. And so sorry. And so we need to really shed light on what's going on. Unfortunately, we have issues like we have what's it called, the ag gag. We have a law that prevents people from getting into these spaces like CAFOs, concentrated animal feed operations, and any meat packing plant or whatever it is, from showing the truth of what's happening. And then we have Kim Reynolds, who is pushing for more CAFOs. Like we have like 15,000 and a bunch of illegal CAFOs as well. But on top of that, this government thinks, hey, we can handle another 30,000 of these things. There's already 40 million pigs in this state. I don't really think we need more. But it's like I said, Iowa has become a sacrifice zone. Iowa is the place where you produce as much pork as you can, and it ships to China and it ships to Mexico. You produce as much corn as you can, and because a majority of that corn is used for ethanol production. Ethanol production is horrible for our environment. I don't know if you've heard about Mead, Nebraska. If you were to go to Great Plains Action Society's YouTube page, you can see a video we made with our drone with Nebraska Stand about the disaster there. Pesticide-laden seed corn was being used to create ethanol, and it turned out to be this massive environmental disaster. It's a Superfund site now, and I don't know really if within our lifetimes if that spot is going to be safe. And so, and then we have fertilizer plants. One of the biggest fertilizer plants in the country is located on the Mississippi River, on the actual bank of the Mississippi River, with more ammonium nitrate than the one in West Texas that exploded a few years ago and created a literal earthquake because the explosion was so great. So, this is basically a place where the health and safety of people is not being thought of first. It all comes down to the bottom line. There are, cities suing counties because the water is so polluted. There are no zoning laws in 8 states, so people can dump whatever they want into the waters. And we're in deep trouble. And this is why Indigenous people need to stand up to these practices by, yes, growing first foods. Meskwaki Nation is doing so. Omaha Nation is doing so. Great Plains Action Society, we're working within urban centers. We would like to get urban farms, in Des Moines and Sioux City in particular, because 70% of Iowa's native population lives there. We are working to lobby with, I think I see Mark Carberry on this call, and he's doing work, with a bunch of folks in the state on, on lobbying to, get rid of the ag gag. We're working with IARA. Well, we're not working with them necessarily. We support them. We support all their work. We really want these people to succeed in their efforts. Here's the other aspect of this: worker mistreatment. So many people that are working in the fields of Iowa and the meatpacking plants are from south of the border. They're indigenous to South America. They are Indigenous peoples. They have a right to be here. These are traditional migration routes. They can be here, but yet they are, in my opinion, almost living in indentured servitude, so that they can make ends meet. And so, and the long-term goal really has to be about rematriating land, bringing the prairie back here, getting the buffalo back on it, and stewarding the land the way it used to, because prairie is not an end stage environment. It's an environment that wants to eventually get to woodland. The reason why it was prairie is because Indigenous people, they tended to it, they burnt it, they had controlled burns, they moved the buffalo wherever they wanted the buffalo to be. And so there was definitely harmony. There was a partnership going on for thousands of years here, which is why, the prairie remained prairie. industry. So if we really want to push back at what's happening within the food industry, we need to look to Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge in order to do that. And we need to rematriate the land. We need to trust Indigenous people and their ways and their perspectives so that we can combat, basically Christian colonial capitalism. It's very unfortunate because Iowa has been completely, it was cleared out really of all the Indigenous people. The Meskwaki left, came back, and they're not even from here. The Meskwaki are, they came here 200 years ago. So the actual, original inhabitants of Iowa have been moved out. The Iowa of Kansas and Nebraska, well, they're in Kansas and Nebraska now. And so we have a long way ahead of us in order to get where we want to go. Now, I'll finish off by speaking about truth giving. And that's something that we started organizing around about 5 years ago as Great Plains Action Society, because truth giving is full of racist tropes. It tells a whitewashed history. It does not tell the truth. The Wampanoag were not okay with these settler invaders that showed up on their shores, because within days they had stolen from them. They were being violent, and in no way whatsoever was this a happy time. The type of racist mythology that is being told to our children in their schools and throughout the country is really harmful, actually, to the psyche of Indigenous peoples. I do love the idea of people gathering and being thankful and celebrating the harvest. Yes, that's an important part of it, but it's built on a lie. And so that's why we started to organize Truths Giving and have this educational event at this time of year, so that we could tell the truth of what is actually happening. And then we could celebrate together, in a way that, yes, is similar to eat and be together, but to be, mindful of what Indigenous people are really doing, and the respect they deserve for our continued, fight at the front lines to, push back at colonial capitalist practices. So this year, we'll be celebrating Truth Giving in a unique way. We'll be hosting a fashion show in Des Moines, actually, with Black, Latina, and Indigenous designers. And then speaking about the ban on critical race theory, otherwise known as diversity, equity, and inclusion training in the state of Iowa. And then also celebrating Trans Day of Remembrance, because it falls on the day that we're hosting this event on November 20th this year. And, we've celebrated it many different ways. We've done mutual aid, in the past, we've done mutual aid, giveaways. We've had, bands play, and we've, done fundraisers for different, issues. So, we just basically just try to find joy being in community with BIPOC folks, and really cherish radical ideologies that are pushing back and decolonizing white supremacist institutions. I mean, let's just be honest, this government is built on white supremacy. This land, this country was built at the point of a gun for the sake of free labor and free land. And so we have a lot to do, this is why at this time of year I'm really glad to be able to speak about the agricultural industry, truth giving, first foods, and how we can do better. So ahai ki tatamihin, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Sikowis. There were some questions in the chat. Mary Hanson Harrison talked about, well, Mary, why don't you ask your question? How you would get more tribal members to run for office was Mary's question.
How do we get more tribal members to run for office? This is why I love oh, what is the name of that organization? Indigenous.
Environmental Network.
No, not them. Sorry. No, this is a political organization. Advance Indigenous something. I'm gonna have to look them up. They are a group of people. They're a 501c4, just like Great Plains Action Society is, and they are working specifically to get Indigenous peoples to run for office. We have to get Indigenous. We can get Indigenous peoples to run for office if we can overcome voter suppression and also distrust of the government. We've been working on that for about 4 years now. The timing is not a coincidence. Trump got voted in, and we were like, "Oh hell no!" So we've been working really hard to increase not just Indigenous but BIPOC engagement in political issues here in Iowa. But there's so many hurdles ahead of us, and it always comes down to funding. Like we need funding to do this work. We have to figure out a way to overcome the lack of funding that Indigenous peoples have. First Nations Development Institute did a study between 2006 and 2014 that found that Indigenous led issues or Indigenous issues and Indigenous organizations receive only 0.6% of total foundation funding each year. That's also been verified by the Solutions Project that's done a similar study. And so that's not even like that doesn't even like match our population here in this country. And so within that, also white-led organizations are getting funding to work on our issues. So it's ridiculous. It takes a lot to do this work. And yeah, we are working within the confines of capitalism, which we're trying to dismantle and break apart. But at the same time, we need the funding to do it. So that's what it comes down to.
Okay. Let's see. Trying to read these. When someone asked if the ag-gag law is a federal law or an Iowa law. My understanding is an Iowa law. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's like Iowa and like maybe 2 or 3 other states in the country that have something similar.
Mike Carberry asks, when using a land statement in Iowa, what should I say? This is like when you hear people introduce themselves by saying what native land they live on.
Oh, yeah. So, well, it differs depending on where you are in Iowa. But if you're in Iowa City, it's the home of the Iowa, the Sac, and the Meskwaki.
I'm writing that down because I live in Iowa City.
I can send you a land acknowledgement that I helped write. I helped write. I'm a commissioner on the Iowa City Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we wrote a land acknowledgement that I like. Also, if you're going to put land acknowledgements together, I always tell people like they kind of hurt, like because as an Indigenous person, as much as we appreciate people recognizing the land that they're on, what does that actually mean? It's like kind of like saying, hey, I'm on this stolen land, thanks. Like we need to do better. So I'm always telling people that they need to put their money where their mouth is, essentially, or they need to, reach out more, provide resources, and just do what they can to really be an ally in this fight. Because if you work with Indigenous people and uplift their efforts, it's really going to help everybody in the long run.
So for Thanksgiving, it might be a really good idea for us to discuss these facts around our own dining room tables with our family and friends, and even think about suggesting contributions to Great Plains Action Society or another more local Indigenous organization in your part of the world. Is that a good option for being an ally? And how could WILPF specifically partner with you on some projects, Sikowis?
Oh yeah, for sure. Of course, I'm never going to say no to support to do the work we do. But you know, I also like want to tell people, like, because I think there's people calling in from all over the country, like find out who's local to you, and support them. You know, I really appreciate that type of model more, because it's not. Yeah, we do of course appreciate the fiscal support, but what I really like is people building, you know, their network and creating more solidarity within their region, within their area and their
Sure.
communities. So, you know,
Um,
find out what's going on there. And then, yeah,
Sandy-
we can talk about next year and Truthsgiving.
Sandy Thacker asks, what do you think about attempts by Indigenous groups to raise money to buy back their stolen land?
Oh, sorry, something. Okay. I think that's great, because then it's literally like their land. It's unfortunate that has to be done. The Meskwaki folks have been buying land. It's not necessarily their stolen land, you know, but like it's really cool how they are considered they're actually a settlement because they bought their land a long time ago, and they're continuing to buy land through their economic development process. And so, you know, I think that it sucks, of course, but at the same time, it is what it is. We are where we are, and I'd like to see people rematriate land back to Indigenous people. But also, if it's being bought, like then you know, at least it's back in the hands of the you know the people it's been stolen from, and I think the people that can manage it much better.
Okay. Yeah, I'm searching for more questions, but I'm not seeing any. So let's move
May I
on.
say, Mary Beth, that there have been some links that have been put into the chat by Deanna Murphy and Rowan Fairgrove that people might want to check that are related to what Sikowis has been talking about.
Oh yeah, I did want to tell people that if you would like to take action at Thanksgiving, if you go to our truthsgiving.org page, because we created a website specifically for Truthsgiving, you can go and look at this. It's a small thing, but you can take a look at, like, you know, 3 steps that you can take, you know, for Truthsgiving or for Thanksgiving, educating yourself, spreading the word, you know, talking about it at your, you know, your dinner, because you know, real change comes from, you know, families you know, working together, making change from within. You know, I truly believe that. So have those difficult conversations if you can.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Sikowis. We hope you'll be able to stay on the call if you have time. We'll understand if you can't hang in there. We've got a few announcements that we want to move towards this month, and the first comes from Laura Dewey in Detroit about the upcoming WILPF officer election. Laura, go ahead. You're on mute, though. And Laura has walked away from her computer at the moment. Let's move on to the next announcement from Teresa Elamine. Teresa, please unmute yourself. And I'm looking, is Teresa still here? I know she was on earlier.
She's here, but she's on mute. Teresa,
Okay.
you have to click off your mute if you want to speak. I mean, I don't know if she's there because it's just a picture, but maybe she's away from her computer.
Okay, well, we're going to move on. Hi, Ellen.
Yeah, if Teresa can't get connected, I just posted in the chat the registration information for the inaugural Fannie Lou Hamer branch of WILPF Human Rights Conference, which is on Saturday, December 11th, and which Teresa is organizing. So The Zoom registration link is in the chat just now.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, it's exciting. We have a new branch in Columbus, Georgia that Teresa has organized, and it's great that they're putting together this conference in their first year. Good for them. They're hoping all of us and we'll sign up and attend, so put it on your calendar. Going back to Nancy Price, Nancy is co-chair of the Earth Democracy Committee, has an update on what's going on at the COP26 conference unfolding in Glasgow, Scotland. And Nancy, should we be hopeful or worried?
I think we should be very worried. However, there's a great challenge and opportunity for us to really work within WILPF and our allies in the US and across our sections and allies globally to really build a vibrant and solid and determined global campaign to meet the climate challenge and the climate crises that we're going to be faced with. I will be writing a summary of the outcome of the COP26 meeting for the next December e-news. But here I just briefly wanted to make a couple of remarks. First of all, there is a WILPF delegation from the Environmental Working Group of International WILPF in Glasgow. Some of them have been attending panels, some have been speaking. I've seen some out in the various gatherings and marches with banners and signs. And there will be a report back from some of those members of the delegation, which I will send out an announcement for in an e-alert. Secondly, there was just announced that Representative Barbara Lee of a Democrat from California in the East Bay area of San Francisco, submitted a resolution, House Resolution 767, with the title, Recognizing the Duty of the Department of Defense to annually report all greenhouse gas emissions and progress on reduction targets.
Hi, let me talk to you in a minute. Okay.
This is a very important resolution that immediately on November 3rd, when she submitted it, gathered 20 co-sponsors. I will be sending out an action alert on how to call your representative and either thank them for being a co-sponsor or to invite them to become one. This is a very important effort to really call out the US military's carbon bootprint, which is equal to that of 140 countries in emission of greenhouse gases. And we will be mobilizing around this with other peace and environmental groups to get as many co-sponsors and signatures on a petition, and also get this then supported with to go into for it to be submitted to the Senate as well. So this is a very important development because in the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, reports by the military of their greenhouse gas carbon footprint was voluntary, and even in that regard, very little was reported. And the US military's footprint is so massive that even this beginning effort to hold them accountable must be widely supported. I wanted to mention that in particular right now, the groups that went to Glasgow and were participating in the inside for the UN COP26 meetings and panels and discussions, and participating in the COP26 coalition events that were organized by a wide variety of individuals and organizations to be the People's Climate Summit. So first of all, we had the UN and world leaders, heads of state, financial and corporate elites, making speeches and huddled with each other, figuring out what commitments they might make that would be hopefully binding. Then there were the youth, 100,000 or more reported to have marched on Saturday, November 6th, in a massive global climate convening. And every day in Glasgow, inside and outside, were gathered with to listen to many of their young colleagues speak, campaign, develop strategies. Many of these young climate leaders spoke up eloquently at the official UN inside meetings and challenged the leaders to make commitments and to hold the global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade so that we can avoid the increase beyond that benchmark and reach even more dramatic tipping points of rising seas, climate crises, disasters, terrible storms, droughts, and impacts on agriculture. Then we have large contingent of environmental NGOs who could afford to come to Glasgow and help fund contingents of their members and supporters to join them. And they were inside the climate meetings with booths and being interviewed and trying to capture the attention of the UN and other delegates. Some were interviewed, for example, on Democracy Now!, and you can look at those programs at your leisure. Then we had the civil society organizations from both the first world and the developing and third world countries. Most importantly, because of access to vaccinations, because of the funding problems to get from the third world and developing countries to Glasgow, and because of the problem with visas and also what do you call it?
COVID?
Well, COVID and waiting times, many hundreds of individuals and delegates and civil society organizations just didn't make it to Glasgow. And that
there were huge amounts of railroad strikes at the same time.
Yes, there were. So it was very unbalanced in the representation of people from the countries most impacted by global warming and climate catastrophe to be there to speak for themselves. There were some indigenous tribal groups there, but there was a wide disparity in who was able to get there and speak up and who was not.
So what should we be worried about and what can we do about it, Nancy?
Yeah, so most recently, 200 plus scientists urged in an open letter that global warming must be held to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Biden in Rome embraced fossil fuels, and then when he got to Glasgow, he embraced the reduction of methane. So we need to watch what the US commitment is going to be. The leaders of China and Russia did not go to Glasgow, but in fact, John Kerry, who's the climate ambassador for President Biden, has announced along with Xi Jinping of China that they will work together in climate reduction, climate and greenhouse gas reduction policy, in particular transition away from fossil fuels and in particular coal. We'll have to wait and see what that amounts to, what real commitments will be made and how those commitments will be overseen. What is at stake really is that we must focus on 2030 as the benchmark for commitments for getting out of fossil fuels, for a just transition to sustainable economy and sustainable energy production using solar, wind, not falling for false solutions such as carbon credits, cap and trade, and others. So there's a lot to report on that I will try to put together for the next e-news and let you know what's really come out of COP26. The first draft was released. It was only 850 words long with no mention of fossil fuels. So you can see we have quite a ways to go. I wanted to mention that Nancy Pelosi, in an interview in Democracy Now, mentions climate leads to migration, and that we have to look at migration as a problem of national security rather than addressing the root causes, which in fact is the use of fossil fuels that create greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. So we really need to watch at what kind of policy comes out of the Biden administration and how Pelosi really herself addresses the issue of climate in regard to national security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Laura has rejoined us. Laura, please make your announcement now.
Hi, I apologize. I had to take a call and I hate to miss anything Nancy says, but anyway, as many of you know, you have a ballot in your mailbox in your house, hopefully by now, for the election of the board members. So every year we hold elections and we have 4 positions and 4 people running for those positions. The ballots are due the 29th, and I urge everyone to vote. And an e-alert will be coming out hopefully Monday, which will have a link to the candidates' resumes or their bios, their activist bios, and the letters of recommendation, so that you can get more information than what you get in your ballot. And if you choose, make a donation while you're voting, or even if you decide not to vote. So November 29th is the day that they have to be in the mailboxes. Thank you very much.
And will you say something about our not having the candidates speak tonight, Laura?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we're supposed to have the candidates speak tonight, and I neglected to, well, some of the candidates knew, one candidate knew because they're very attentive. They knew in advance that today was supposed to be the day, but unfortunately I did not inform Mary Beth in time to clear a spot for that. So what we're planning on doing is something in January, hopefully at the One WILPF call, where people can meet the newly seated board. Because to be honest, those 4 candidates on the ballot will be on the board, simply because this is a non-competitive election. I think we all would prefer more competitive elections because it reflects that there's more interest in the leadership. Maybe we'll get that next year. On the other hand, I'm grateful to the 4 candidates for coming forward and saying, yes, I believe in serving in the board. I want to step up to the plate. And in the meantime, there still are positions vacant. And if anyone is interested in serving on an interim basis for 1 year, they can apply to the board to do so. The board is allowed to choose to find people to serve for just simply 1 year positions until the next elections. All right, that's signing off.
Thank you, Laura. Our next announcement is from Ellen Thomas. She wanted to briefly talk about her the Prop 1 and remind us about it.
Hi. I wanted to remind everybody that we've been working to support Eleanor Holmes Norton's Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act for many years now in WILPF. Norton has been introducing it every session since 1994. And this session, it's HR 2850. And it's asking to provide for nuclear weapons abolition and economic conversion, and it says in the beginning of it, provide leadership by signing and ratifying the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons or any other international agreement that provides for the dismantlement and elimination of all nuclear weapons in every country under strict and effective international control, and redirect the resources that are being used for nuclear weapons programs in converting all the nuclear weapons industries and in retraining the employees to shift to a constructive, ecologically beneficial peace economy, which includes strict control of all fissile materials and radioactive waste, and in addressing human and infrastructure needs, including development and deployment of sustainable, carbon-free and nuclear-free energy sources, healthcare, housing, education, agriculture, and environmental restoration. And with climate change happening, and people wanting to know how we're going to get things done that need to be gotten done, this bill is an answer it's not the answer, but it is a step in the right direction. It would be a statement from the United States, finally, that we are willing to get rid of our nuclear weapons and that we will use the money to transform the arms industries to carbon-free, nuclear-free energy and other human needs. And before COVID, people were collecting signatures on paper petitions, which I've got here, and I've provided copies of it to the Japanese when we went to Japan in 2019. And we were planning on delivering the petitions to the United Nations in 2020, but didn't work out. And but there is an online petition which you can find at prop1.org. And I try to keep things up to date there. So please go there and figure out what you can do to help. Please contact your representative by phone, by email, when you're allowed to have meetings, by personal meetings, and ask for co-sponsorship of this bill. There are a number of co-sponsors this year, good ones, and I didn't pull that up for you, but you can find it easily by Googling HR 2850 co-sponsors, and it'll give you the list from congress.gov.
Thank you. Thank you.
Robin has her hand raised about this, I think.
Yeah, yes. Hi, everyone. So I'm so glad to follow Ellen, because today being Veterans Day, or let's call it Armistice Day, our representatives are out in public with veterans, and they were right in town here of Burlington, Vermont. And so I went up to our one representative for Vermont named Peter Welch, who has signed on to the Norton bill. And he's about the 7th person. I think we've besieged him enough, and he finally did it. And so I went up to him and thanked him and had a picture taken of me and him with a sign saying, "Thank you, Peter." So I will be sending that out shortly. And that was an opportunity. Now it's past, but it's those public events that politicians have that you can walk right up to them. These two politicians, including Pat Leahy, who of course is super important. He's like 3rd in line to the presidency or something. So there were guys wearing dark glasses located all around, and the transportation, the roads were closed and everything. So it was a little intense in that way, but one could just walk up to them. So that's watch for them in your area and find a way to go up to them. And in my case, it's lucky and pleasant to say thank you. But in other cases, you can remind them to sign up and to co-sponsor. That's what he has said he will do. So it's still a long shot. But in addition, I just wanted to say thank you to the speaker earlier, whose name I don't really have.
Sikowis.
Sikowis. I don't know that she's still on, but I thought that was quite a wonderful presentation. And coming from Iowa, of course, I know about Iowa from Mary Hansen Harrison, who's always talking about agriculture in Iowa and big ag and so on. But this woman, Sikowis, really gave a beautiful explanation of the problems of corn and pigs together destroying the land. And I just wanted to thank her. I don't know that she's still on. Anyway, okay.
Thanks, Robin. Our next speaker is Cheryl Spencer, the co-chair of the third. We've now heard from all three co-chairs of the Disarm Committee. Cheryl has a potentially exciting proposal. Welcome. Yes. Please tell us about it.
Yes, I'm going to share screen. Okay, which is always a little fractious for me. Let's see if this is going to work. Can you all see this? Starts off with the words fundraising opportunity. Yes. You need to kind of close down your chat if you've got a small screen like me. And okay, so this is also in the text pad in the Google Doc. So later on, you can get this for yourselves. So Ploughshares Fund is been around for 50 years, giving away money to usually places like Arms Control Association and other well-placed lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Last year, they decided they needed more women involved in getting money from them and doing things. And this year, or this coming year, they're actually expanding their diversity and equity initiative. They're calling it Equity Rises. And they're trying to build a stronger community that those kinds of peoples, advocates, activists, researchers, creative thinkers, working across identity, sector, and geography, okay, to reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. So they're looking to forge new collaborations with new partners, both inside and outside the nuclear field. Okay, so they have come to realize that nuclear weapons are very much associated with racism, inequity, exclusion, greed, corruption, and injustice. Okay, and so they're hoping to get voices who will reply to this request for proposals, who represent people who've suffered from these nasty things and then have ideas of how to get rid of them. So they have $1 million to give away. That's a lot of money. They expect to make grants between $10,000 and $75,000. So we need to be thinking about activities that we haven't done because they would have taken too much money. Usually the money is used on paying staff to do things, maybe paying interns to do things, maybe paying artists to create new artwork to be used. So I'm trying not to give anybody any pre-ideas. I'm looking for brainstorming sessions that our Disarm Committee, WILPF branches, WILPF members, and then other groups. We do have connections with grassroots and community groups. And I think we should try to use those connections to create a proposal that will suit the Ploughshares Fund. They actually only need a concept note. You don't have to do the full proposal by February the 15th. They'll look through all the concept notes and then choose a few and ask them for a full proposal. So they're trying to widen the network of voices. And I think we have a good chance of widening that network of voices. There are 3 criteria that a proposal must meet. And I think we have capabilities in all 3. The impact of nuclear weapons production on or use on Indigenous and other frontline communities. We already been working with the downwinders in New Mexico, for example. Then the project should focus on challenging racism and white supremacy in nuclear policies and institutions. our Advancing Human Rights Committee will have some expertise in that. And overall, trying to address the imbalance in the nuclear field and trying to use intersectional lenses on nuclear issues. So here is the URL for the full proposal. They actually, what Plowshares is so well organized, they will be having 3 webinars about this RFP. The first one will be on the 1st of December, and they will explain more detail. And so I would like us to be prepared to, well, I will attend that meeting. I promise to attend that meeting because I need people to have come forward to help me before that. I know it's not very long from now. So they're very, lots of details in this RFP. So they actually tell you what kind of projects they're looking for, okay? The project has to fit into one of these 3 areas: challenging racism and white supremacy in nuclear policies and institutions, or building actionable connections between nuclear weapons issues and other issues to address militarism's influence on foreign and domestic policies. And thirdly, examining and dismantling the military-industrial complex. Especially the third, sounds like an enormous job. Our project wouldn't have to accomplish this all in one go. It's just a 1-year project that we would be designing. Anyway, so those are the 3 areas, and I'm hoping that some other people would like to join with Disarm, other issues committees, and just regular members to brainstorm using all this information that I've just gone through, thinking about what could we do if we had, say, $20,000 to spend. Most of us are volunteers. So, yes?
Cheryl, have you thought about setting a date or giving some date options for when you might meet?
I said here, preliminary meeting next week, essentially, in order to squeeze a meeting in before Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving comes right up to the 1st of December. I'm intending to have a preliminary meeting next week. And depending on who puts their hand up right now or writes to Disarm, there's the Disarm web address to indicate. I asked by tomorrow, but in fact by the Sunday would be sufficient. Then those of us who decide we'd like to meet, then between us we will decide the exact time of a preliminary meeting. I would say no.
A meeting could be very, very important for getting a concept in place.
Yes. I'm hoping a brainstorming session is what I'm thinking is our preliminary step in this whole thing. I would like to hear other people's views. I know we have other groups that we can approach. I probably wouldn't invite them to this meeting. I would probably suggest it just be WILPFers in the beginning. So I can answer some questions now if we have a couple of minutes.
Ashley Carrington said she's interested.
Who?
Ashley Carrington.
Ashley Carrington. Ashley, you're not a name I recognize. Could you put your email address in the chat?
She's new.
The which? Triangle branch? Okay. You see, when I'm screen sharing, I cannot see the chat. So
she also put her email in the chat for you.
Okay. When I stop screen sharing, I'll be able to see that. Anybody else?
Deanna Murphy also has put her email in the chat for you.
Who?
Teresa Elamine has her hand up, Mary Beth. Teresa.
Yeah, I see that. I don't think that's about this, but
it might be. And just to say that I am one of the plenary speakers at Teresa's December the 11th event. I will be talking about the TPNW. Right. So the branches in the South do have an interest in working against nuclear weapons.
Okay, great.
I'd like to speak for myself if I can be acknowledged.
Yes,
I have
yes, Teresa.
hand raised.
Teresa, I just wanted to let you know that we did call on you earlier, but you were not there. And Ellen Schwartz did already share information about your December conference, but please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I dozed off for a moment. But the question I have for Cheryl, I think I saw a little bit about this. The request for proposals goes out, but the actual deadline I think I saw was February. So could she say a little bit more about the timeline? Because the actual deadline gives us a chance, I think, for this proposal to be an actionable item coming out of the Fannie Lou Hamer Human Rights Conference in the TPNW breakouts, because there is a heavy concentration of nuclear power plants in the South, and there are numerous organizations working on issues around nuclear, particularly as it relates to racial disparities. I think of Georgia One, Women in Action for New Directions, as one of the WILPF members in the Metro Atlanta area is a vice president on the board of Georgia One. So I envision several of us, and I am raising my hand to say I am interested in participating and being a part of the initial conversation that you're proposing, Cheryl. So I would like to receive the information for that initial conversation. Thank
Right.
you.
And I am, as you know, you've asked us to provide actions that branch members can take at the end or as a result of your December the 11th event. And I've already got a very long list of things that our members can do. And indeed, thinking about the Ploughshares Fund request for proposals is one of those action items that I will be presenting during the breakout sessions in the December the 11th event. And so indeed, they only asked for a concept note as I re-looked at it. So I need, one of the things we need to understand is, what goes into a concept note. So I need to re-look at the RFP website and see what they mean by concept note. Hopefully it's a lot less effort. I'm told by people, Nancy Price has made a proposal in the past to Ploughshares, and she says it's really quite a lot of bureaucratic rigmarole. So we will indeed come up with something that suits their criteria and something we think we can do. Thank you. I'm going to, yes?
Cheryl, I'm trying to understand the timeline. So the request for proposals will go out relatively soon, but the deadline for proposals I thought I read was something like February.
Right, February the 15th is a deadline for what they call a concept note. It's not a full proposal. They will then go through the several hundred, I expect, because they've been advertising this RFP quite widely. I expect a lot of groups are going to jump on this. It's a lot of money available. And so only a few, they will have some committee that will go through the concept notes, and then a few groups will be asked to do a full proposal. So we don't have to wait to submit to the February the 15th, but yes, we have time to.
Well, I think based on the categories, they'll be very interested in the inclusion of women and people of color that will be outlined in the concept note. And I think that it might take a little time, given the present social composition of the Disarm Committee. And I think those of us who are stepping up now as women of color, Ashley, Dee, myself, I think it will be a great opportunity to kind of fully discuss the concept note at the Fannie Lou Hamer Human Rights Conference. I am not likely to be that much in the breakout, but I think the fact that that's happening early enough in December, I could kind of see us setting January sometime to try to fully come together with the inclusion of women of color branches, led by women of color branches in the South, like the Triad, the new Piedmont branch, the Metro Atlanta, the Fannie Lou Hamer branch. I think possibly most of those branches would be interested in participating. And I would like to think that several other branches around the country would be interested. So it could be a WILPF, a U.S. section submission of the.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you very much. Cheryl, would you please put your email in the chat again, because I saw that Kayla Begay had expressed interest in the chat as well in participating. And I think it would be wonderful if some of the people who are here tonight could bring, some new blood, new thinking to our effort on this. It's a really exciting opportunity. So thank you very much, Cheryl, for bringing it to us and taking the leadership here. So we're going to move on. We're running a little bit behind. Of course, we're all starting to think about plans for 2022, and advancing our goals takes planning. So as you know, we made a commitment a few years ago to carry out at least one solidarity action a year. And this year is, of course, a significant one with midterm elections coming up. The Biden administration seems to be struggling between people-centered programs and political expediency. So what we wanted to do now is to talk for a few minutes as a group about what kinds of solidarity actions we might propose, and how to get the majority of our members and branches on board.
So one possible action across all of WILPF US was discussed at the opening session of our Congress in July, and it involves organizing a regular action email going out to all of our members, either monthly or bi-weekly, with a specific ask for a phone call to Congress members about timely and important votes and policies. Every one of our issue committees and issues would benefit from such a coordinated effort. And if our talking points always included mention that the caller is from WILPF, is a WILPF member, our visibility on Capitol Hill would also rise. So that's one idea worth discussing. But what ideas do you have for solidarity action in 2022? It's doable, strategic, and raises our national visibility. If you don't have one to suggest right now, maybe we could talk about the specific timely issues you want to focus on and try to develop an action around it as a united national league of peace women. There are a lot. There's protecting the vote. There's passing the voting rights bill. There's normalizing relations with Cuba. There's sending aid and food to Afghanistan. What can you suggest? We've got a few minutes, so let's start a stack and just brainstorm for a few minutes. And even if we can't get very far tonight, we might be able to continue this in the December call. Rowan Fairgrove says, I hope we're planning to go to the Moral March and for for the Poor People's Campaign. Let's see. And the for low wage workers assembly, the PPC is hosting in DC. Can you tell us the date of that again, Rowan? So we're all thinking about it. June 18th, 2022. Good point. Yes, that gives us a lot of time to plan. Thank you. And let's see, we also have an art build across states to reflect proliferation, mass militarization, and aid for Haiti. That's from Ashley Carrington. And yeah, so these are great ideas.
I raised my hand.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy. It's hard for me to see the chat and the raised hands.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm not sure which process you're using. You know, I think One Solidarity Action is a great idea. I think that for 2022, it's such a crucial election year that maybe we need to think of multiple calls to action on specific topics. I know that's expanding, you know, our what it would be to organize that, but I do think WILPF, in combination with various of our allies, that it could be a very movement building activity that we really need for this upcoming election year. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And I see Robin has her hand up. Robin, I'm sorry. Did you have it up from before?
Yeah, well, a date I would propose is January 22nd. Did someone already propose that? That's the anniversary of the announcement of the nuclear, the treaty against nuclear weapons. I think, is it the second anniversary or the first? Anyway, I think Disarm plans to acknowledge that with other groups on that date, and hopefully thereafter comes the coming together, a conference of all the nations that have signed on to it to try to figure out, well, exactly how are we going to implement it. So one event would spread the information about the following event, as I see it. But we will discuss this probably at Sunday's Disarm meeting, and I liked Teresa's idea that at the human rights event on the 11th of December, that could be a brainstorming session to work out larger plans and build and make a proposal for money.
Yeah, Robin, can you also make sure that Teresa has the information for the Disarm meeting this Sunday?
Okay.
It's been put in the chat already.
Okay, thank you. And next is Eileen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have had this idea percolating over the past week or so when I said I would start working on drone warfare again. It coincides with racial issues. Odile has done a lot of work on this. I'm trying to pick up where I left off a couple of years ago. Thanks to Marge Van Cleef, by the way. She's the one who really got me deep into the study of this subject, 6-7 years ago. And I was part of a group for quite a long time, at least 6 or 7 years in Boston. What I'm trying to say is that the material that Odile has gotten from World Beyond War has been very enlightening. This 2.5-hour webinar talks about the weaponized drones that are not being used yet. I'm talking about the weapon part, but definitely are covering the borders. And drones have been on top of a lot of Black Lives Matter protests DC, even West Point, New York. It's very clear from these experts who have been working on this for so long, like Nick Motern. I've known him. We bought a mock, huge mock drone from him and used it for demonstrations right in front of MIT, among other places. Anyway, from these experts, realize that it's just a matter of time when they will be not only armed, but being used in our country, because the police have been using them. This is a lot of scare stuff, but if you listen to this webinar, you do find that it's very reasonably analyzed. So I think it would make a good initiative for plowshares. And are we restricted to one? Let's try for a few.
Yes, I was going to say that, Eileen. There's no reason why we only put in one proposal or one concept note.
Thank you. That's the best I could do in summarizing so far. I'm still in the midst of studying. We're going to have a little committee meeting, hopefully in a week. I'll have to tie some people together and finish up some work I'm doing here. Lots of deaths around my part of the woods here. It's been very sad.
I'm in a really in a pickle here, because while I'd like to extend the discussion about solidarity events and ideas for them, Ellen just let me know that Frank Bibeau has joined us, and I don't want to miss hearing from him, even though it's later than we thought it would be. Welcome, Frank. I hope that you'll be able to share with us some of the work that you're doing on the legal case against the Enbridge folks, and you've got about maybe 10 minutes to tell us all about it.
Okay. Sorry about being late. I'm on my month with Mom, and we're moving her to South Carolina next week. Schedules got goofed up. My sister showed up just before 7 and distracted me with a bunch of Mom stuff. And so I hope you all understand that. You look like a sympathetic crowd for a son. So
we are forgiven.
It's playing to a good audience here.
Yeah, right. So anyway, you go lay down. My dog gets jealous with all the voices and feels neglected. Okay, so what we're doing here in Minnesota is fighting Line 3, but in the midst of fighting Line 3, we're also fighting for our treaty rights in the ceded territory that I live in, the 1855. Technically, our rights are all the way across from Michigan over to North Dakota, but the state of Minnesota is oppressing us and stealing our rights. They're oppressing us from exercising our rights so that they can successfully sell licenses to hunt, fish, and gather to non-Indians and have a good limit, whether it's deer or fish or whatever is how they look at it. And so I've been trying to get our rights recognized correctly under federal law without having a federal case at this point in time that we started. And Line 3 is our vehicle for treaty rights, our way to win at the treaty rights. Let me turn off this TV because I look at the TV and I should be looking at the camera for you all. So Line 3 is much like KXL was and DAPL. And part of my job as an attorney was to do a forensic audit of what happened and what went wrong in DAPL and Standing Rock and what was possibly going to happen in KXL at the time. And so part of what I was looking at was defenses to set up for tribal members here in Minnesota. By doing what I was doing with Rights of Monoman, it created a defense for all the tribal members to have the right to go out and defend Monoman, the right for Monoman to exist and flourish, and to have a climate-free environment and things like that. When we finally went through and exhausted almost all of our remedies in state court, and we still have one case pending in federal court, the other attorneys hit the end, the end of their legal remedies. for myself as a tribal attorney, I've been waiting to go forward with rights of Monoman, but most legal people don't understand it. They're not familiar with the concept, doing it in tribal court, being a tribal attorney. And so I was kind of relegated in a sense to wait till the end to see if the other things might work first. Those haven't worked. Interestingly enough, the state of Minnesota, the DNR, did not like being sued in tribal court by Monoman, by the tribe, by other water protectors, and they resisted and filed in federal court. And federal court has been slow to evolve because tribal courts haven't been around very long. But as a result, they have declared, as much as we argued with the state in tribal court, that the 11th Amendment that provides immunity for states against being sued by citizens of their own state or other states doesn't apply to us, because under the Constitution, we're not citizens. We're Indians, and we're Indians not taxed. We've been separated out from the Constitution, and only Congress has a right to deal with us, and treaties are the supreme law of the land. And so when that document was created, technically none of the Bill of Rights attached to us. That's why there's a Civil Rights Act and an Indian Civil Rights Act. But getting back to it, DNR is trying to figure out a way out of being under our jurisdiction, subject to our laws, and having to answer to someone else instead of just oppressing us continuously. So I'm bringing, I believe, through our mechanism, a new balance in the power of environmental jurisdiction. And that is what's going to change and level the playing field, because when the DNR was turned down by the federal court in Minnesota by the judge, and the judge said that the tribal court has sovereign immunity, the tribal court or the tribal council has tribal sovereign immunity, but DNR, they don't have sovereign immunity. DNR hasn't convinced anybody about that. And so I'm in a case of first impression. I'm fighting with a law that's kind of a first of its kind, recognizing what other people call the personhood of wild rice. In the Anishinaabe culture where we live, we would look at wild rice as one of our relations, just like we would look at a duck or a beaver or a fish. We're all related. And so wild rice takes care of me and I'm taking care of wild rice. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so right now we're at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The DNR has asked twice at the federal court and the 8th Circuit for a preliminary injunction against the tribal court and was not granted it. And I believe that this is going to be the decision that changes the way the landscape for fighting for environmental protections is going to change. Because if our consent is required, because we have other property rights and rights to the animals and the water and the game and those things simply existing and being there available for us in a continuous fashion in perpetuity, then we have to take care of those things right now. If the state isn't doing it, then we have to step in. One of the things that we're looking at doing right now immediately, even though the project is mostly constructed and the oil's operating, there are frac outs, and there is a artesian aquifer that's been punctured that's oozing out, I shouldn't say oozing out, but leaking 100,000 to 150,000 gallons of water a day. They don't know how to seal that off, much like what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. They don't know what they don't know until they find out they don't know, even if you try to explain to them they don't know in the beginning. So we're going to have to do a flyover, and we're going to use thermal imaging to determine where the water is still breaking out of the ground and set a baseline and go out and start monitoring those sites, collecting water samples as well as using drone footage. Because what happened is the people who thought they knew what they were doing expected to be more in more firm ground, rock, things like that. We're in glacial territory where it's primarily sand at the terminal. I can't say the word right, but anyway, the end of the glaciers ended right in Minnesota. Terminal moraine, does that sound right? Anyway, so as a result, we're a lot more sandy, a lot more gravelly, and we have more marsh and muskeg and things like that. And so when they did all this horizontal drilling under all of our water crossings, that place was like quicksand, and that's what happened with the water gushing out in the one place at Clearbrook. So they have permanently and irreparably damaged those aquifers already. That's what I've been told by the hydrologists. And it's some of the same ones that tried to warn them with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I've also been contacted by the scientists, which is funny, from the 1854 territory with regard to Mintac and the mining, because there was a recent court decision, but with the Minnesota Supreme Court that talks about the responsibilities of enforcement by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. But as you work through things, they still give deference to that agency. And so these scientists recognize that I have a way of dealing with things, a new way of doing things representing Monoman, nature, the rights of nature, and I'm doing it in a tribal court setting that's just as valid as state court setting. And that right now the 8th Circuit will probably come out with a decision that says that the DNR has to exhaust its remedies in our tribal courts. And that's what these other scientists want with the mining and the tailings and the runoff from that, to have us use our treaty rights, and it's part of our territory, but further away, to go over and protect those waters as well. So we're already looking to sue the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as well as we did with the DNR, because we can see that they use deference to hide behind, to pollute and permit. And I can see that the way the law is working, that we're going to be able to set our own court record. We may still ultimately end up in federal court, but we will set the lower court record. We will explain how our law works. We will explain why they aren't responsible or guilty or whatever words you want to use for what they've done. But the tricky part is we're only doing declaratory relief and some injunctive relief to prevent them from further use of the water. And so while you can say things, enforcing them is a different matter. And so ultimately we're going to be going to federal court to have those enforced as well. So it's going to be very dynamic. It's caught your attention. It's caught other people's attention. I have lots of phone calls going on and different things, and I'm juggling mom. And so it's amazing how fast the wheels are turning right now with people seeing a new possibility. There were 7 other Chippewa bands that signed on as amicus briefs in the 8th Circuit Court. So it's obvious to them, because we all have the same treaty rights essentially, that they see that this tool is effective. It can be used effectively against the state and the regulatory process. And so there's a new day coming, and that's what we're doing out here in Indian country. Any questions?
Someone asked, is what you cited about not being counted as citizens, is that because of tribal sovereignty?
It's kind of the flip side of what you just said. We weren't considered people under the Constitution that they could just claim as citizens, because they wanted us to be another nation because of the way treaties in the United States was new under independence, the 13 colonies or 8 or whatever it took to become a nation. They wanted us to be another nation. When you look at our early treaties, they refer to us as nations. They wanted us to make sure that they were paying for the land from the people who were perceived to be the owners of that land. And so one of the treaties that we have at the beginning in 1825 sets a boundary between us and the Sioux, simply so that there's not an argument about whose land you're obtaining or purchasing or acquiring. And so it is like sovereignty. They are recognizing us as a sovereign back then, so that they can show all the other countries from Europe that they're a sovereign also, the United States, and they're capable of making treaties with other nations. It's only afterwards that they thought they could break all the deals and get away with it. But now we're at another time in the world where, you know, the word is the word again.
Okay, so Anne Henny asks, she asks, if you win personhood for wild rice, what will it look like? What would happen?
I don't think of it as personhood because it's a new word for me, personhood. I already think of wild rice as having a relationship with me and having a relationship with wild rice. I have a relationship with fish. You know, I was joking around that, you know, under the rights of fish, the fish has the right to be caught by me and eaten as a meal by me. You know, and that's a covenant that we have with each other. But in the meantime, I have to watch out for the water, you know, that the fish lives in. So I have to watch out for the water that the wild rice lives in. So what it means is I'm watching out for my relation. My relation is watching out for me, providing food, and I'm watching out for them so that they can be together and have a healthy world and provide food. It's symbiotic. It truly is.
In some of the papers that you sent me last month, there were documents that showed, how many millions of gallons from what parts of the state Enbridge was planning to, steal public water. Really, is there any discussion at all about having them pay for this water?
Well, that's the sadder part yet, and that's part of the litigation in a sense. So in November of 2020, that's when the Pollution Control Agency granted the permit for Clean Water Act for Enbridge, and that's when they wanted to start construction. In December, Winona LaDuke, who I've known most of my life and worked with her for most of my life, I guess, her and another friend, Tanya Abed, established or set up, whatever magic words you want to use, a ceremonial or treaty lodge right on the Mississippi River, where they thought the pipeline might be coming by, so that they would have that lodge there to pray in and do ceremonies and things like that. And the DNR came by and put a stake right in the middle of it with a little flag and said that they were trespassing. Well, public lands are the primary place that we can exercise our rights. And that's the rights to hunt, fish, and gather. And also under the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act, we can go to sacred places and exercise our spiritual rights. And so I told Winona, I said, go out to the hardware store and buy some signs that say no trespassing and put the federal statute on there for the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act and circle the lodge. Well, the DNR figured out that they couldn't do anything and they couldn't take down that lodge. And that was in December, and that lodge is still there. So when Enbridge saw that that lodge was still there and they had that aquifer breach in January, their independent environmental monitors told no one. They told no one for months. This went on for like 5 months. And we didn't understand this exactly because DNR wasn't being completely honest. So when they contacted a few tribes resource places on an email, they went forward and granted a retroactive permit for 5 billion gallons of water for dewatering. Now, that's what they call it in the big words, but it's really like 3 or 4 or 5 kinds of water going on, because dewatering is a lot of times is not just the aquifer, the artesian aquifer that they breached up in Clearbrook that's releasing all that water, but it also has to do with ditches and other places where they're trying to put in the pipe. And ultimately, a lot of times dewatering is taking that water from one place and putting it in another place. It could be taking it out of the ground to make enough water to prevent the dust from rising too much on the project site or something like that. So you end up with taking water, dewatering, and discharging. Now, they didn't really look at the discharging, even though they modified all the gallons they were taking. They didn't do anything about the discharging that we can see. So you have this retroactive permit in June for 5 billion gallons. Then I think in mid-September, they come out with a second set of memos that says they're fining Enbridge $3.3 million for the environmental damage. Now, that's not even for the water. And I'm thinking, now, how do you guys get to have the money? How do you guys let them destroy the water? How do you guys tell them that they have a 30-day order to restore that aquifer and they can't? Then what's the deal here? What's the consequence? And it's a misdemeanor, possibly punished in the criminal court of Clearbrook or Clearwater County by the county attorney. Well, it's a bigger crime than that. And so we're going to have to look at these other kinds of consequences and things. It's a very weird deal of what's going on. So that permit triggered our exercise of the law because we weren't in litigation with DNR. We're not in litigation with the Pollution Control Agency anymore either. And so I see this. Go ahead.
It sounds so amazing that the Department of Natural Resources, charged with protecting our natural resources, would be supporting Enbridge's claims to this water. That's one question. And another one is, are the people of Minnesota generally aware of this theft of water in these amounts, billions and billions of gallons. And how do they feel about it? Because water is, everyone can see now how important water is as a resource.
I think it's becoming more apparent, but it was probably exacerbated with the drought that we also had this year. And so it really kind of threw people off. They don't know what it means. And it's not going to be transferred knowledge necessarily. Although if you look on the news right now, tonight, the cost of everything is going up 10%, it looks like. Well, when you don't have wild rice to harvest and you don't have wild rice to sell, either green for other people to process and then sell to others, or make it for your own food, then you've lost out on income, you've lost out on food. So those impacts, are real, is how I look at those things for us. And so the destruction of the economy for us is immeasurable in a sense. And I don't want to go into all of the attacks on it, but this summer also the governor was looking to give out money to the ranchers and farmers who didn't have sufficient water down in southern Minnesota. Well, they didn't have it in southern Minnesota because there wasn't any water being released in northern Minnesota. So if you're looking for campaign contributions, and this is how I look at this whole puzzle now, if you're the governor who's Democratic and or the president who's Democratic, you're not going to do a thing that looks like you're anti-big oil because you want those campaign donations. You're not going to do a thing that makes it look like you're anti-labor because those are the people who work with big oil, or they work with mining, or you end up with the other group that pro forma there with the drugs and the medical industry. So after those three big expendable campaign donation entities are on the list that you want to still get your campaign donations for the Democrats and Republicans, I try to think who's left that has expendable cash right now. And the next three people are the three guys who launched rockets into space, right? Now, after you list that six, who's number seven? I can't even figure out who's number seven who has a bunch of campaign dollars for these guys to depend on if they go against big oil or if they go against mining, because then they're going against labor. And that's voters for sure. So I think that they're selling us out. They don't know what else to do. They're selling us out for campaign dollars.
Yeah, this is something that the people of Minnesota need to be painfully reminded of. Ann Henney clarified, she said, I really meant what would be the legal and practical impacts of wild rice having rights under US law.
Oh, well, under US law, we might get there. There's a technical process that we could possibly do through the EPA and through the, what would we call that? The National Historic Preservation Act, I think. And under that, you have tribal historic properties. And wild rice could be classified as a historic property because it is a historic cultural property for us. It connects all of our culture together. And so if that was to become recognized in that part of the federal act, that would be another way of having consent about saying whether or not wild rice was so important that you can't do this here. Now, that's a legal way of looking at it. It's not a personhood way of looking at it. But what I hear from wild rice when I talk with it, I have a little processing plant that I inherited. So I handle wild rice. I buy wild rice. I sell wild rice. I do those things as well. You know, you have to be engaged. Wild rice says, hey, watch out for everybody else too. So you have to think about wild rice as being a person who's trying to watch out for everybody so everybody watches out for it. So it's both. It's legal and person.
Okay, we have one of our members in Minnesota who says she's not Native American, but she's highly interested in this struggle. She lives in Minnesota and signed up to be active on the Honor the Earth site. I suspect there are other of our members that might also be interested in helping with this. How would they do that, Frank?
Well, probably with Honor the Earth and through Winona LaDuke is probably the best method. that's why I'm in this struggle with Winona. She's the most dynamic woman I know. I don't want to be that person she is, but I'm certainly willing to support her and what she's doing, and that's what I do. And so our joke is that I'm Winona in drag and she's Frank in drag. And so she's looking to always find money to help support me with what I'm doing, just because she knows I'm plugged in for the part she can't be looking at. And she's looking at a different part of the pipeline for the same issues with Frack House down by the Shell River, where she had their water protector camp. And I would tell you that contributing to Monoman versus DNR, if there's Monoman versus PCA or flyovers, whatever a person might want to call it, if they want to dedicate that kind of funding, I would go through Honor the Earth, because Winona is an active participant in what we're doing. Honor the Earth is one of the 5 contributors for the first flyover we're going to have, and that's going to probably be next week, and that's a $50,000 get together. So, you know, it takes money. It's unfortunate, but there's a lot of scientific equipment, and ultimately there'll be somebody who will help us, you know, or fund those things in a different way. But, you know, that's the most logical place for it to go, because I know what Winona's going to do with it. She's been doing the same thing. We've been in the struggle for 7 years now. We've just now come to the front. And so we know that we have to continue, because even if Line 3 is pumping oil just like it does in DAPL against the court orders there, our territories also go across northern Wisconsin and Michigan, and that's where Line 5 is. That's where the Mackinac Bridge problem is, the Mackinac Straits crossing problem. So we have to use these same treaty rights. 6 of those Chippewa bands that joined in the amicus brief are from Wisconsin. They're there from 1842 and 1854 signatory bands. They have the same rights that we have. They want to protect wild rice, the Great Lakes, and all of this water the same as we do. That's why they're an amicus brief. I think that wild rice is the magical mystique that's going to continue to do its thing. You know, I don't know. Go ahead.
It sounds like this is another good project or cause to donate to around Thanksgiving, as you're talking around your Thanksgiving tables about, you know, where our food comes from, what the challenges are to the rights of nature and the rights of this food. Maybe consider talking to your family about the Great Plains Action Society in Iowa and Frank's honorearth.org website in the other states that he's talking about. This is one way that our members can support him. And meanwhile, we'll try to stay in touch, Frank. And I hope that if you come up with some other ways that we can stand with you, we would be happy to do so. Well, we're mostly grannies, but we're used to standing out and protesting.
No, I could tell by listening that, you know, I have to joke because most of the people I'm working with are Gray Panthers, you know, so that's just how the world is at this point. And of course, when I say that, everybody looks at me like, yeah, join the club. I see you're pretty gray there, dude. But right. I mean, it's how it works. What I would say is I didn't get a lot of wild rice this year for a variety of reasons, but I can send you some email information about anybody who might want to get a little bit of wild rice, you know, 5, 10, 20 pounds, something like that. I sell it for $15 a pound, but it's, you know, it's authentic. It's right from where we are. It's Indian country. So.
Nancy has her hand up.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, hello, Mr. Bibeau. I was wanting to ask you about a rights of nature claim to protect wild rice.
Yes. That's what we're doing right now.
You are? Yeah. Okay,
yes.
Great. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. And I know it's new stuff for a lot of people to even hear the words tribal court or tribal law, but it's like the third rail. We have rights. Right. And we're exercising them there in a way that it's never been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to let you know that the Earth Democracy Committee of WILPF does have a Rights of Nature project. So we would talk with you and support you.
Good. Good.
Nancy,
I think,
Nancy,
go ahead.
Nancy, could you explain a little bit briefly about the water course that we did and that we still have in our archives? Might be worth dusting off.
Yes, well, was it 2002 or so, a 10 or 12 course study guide was created by some women in the Cape Cod chapter on Save the Water. It was part of the Save the Water campaign. And so there were, I guess, 10 or 12 lesson plans, you could call them, chapters. And it really was a national campaign at that point with rights of nature discussed and other issues that related to the issue of keeping water public and not privatized. And, many other topics, bottled water, campaign against Nestle. So do we have that online by any chance, Mary Beth?
Your water course? I'm not sure, but we've been talking about
it. It would need a lot of updating now, I think, but I suspect the most current issue is the financialization of nature and in that regard, water. That is creating markets, investing markets for aspects of nature. And I think we have to really pay attention to that and understand how the investment in Wall Street seeks to further create as private property all the natural resources of Mother Earth.
Right. Right. I think this is the way we're going to go. I was talking with a friend the other day about carbon capture credits.
Oh, terrible. They're terrible.
Well, I don't know what they are or aren't exactly, but what I explained to him was then we would use rights of nature, but we would call it rights of trees because we have a symbiotic relationship with trees. We have a spiritual relationship with trees, and trees are everywhere. And so that covers that whole territory. And that becomes a different way of protecting water because they rely on water, So all of this is just kind of a, I don't know what you want to call it, but more of just it is rights of nature. But we understand, we see ourselves as part of nature. We don't, we don't own it. It has us.
Correct. Yes. Without nature, we wouldn't thrive or survive.
Right.
I think I've put your email in the chat and you may be being contacted by people who want to buy rice.
Okay. Well, and I'll try to get something together there for you and you can share it with everybody too, that, in a little bit of a, what should we call it, a structured way, but it doesn't matter what way it goes.
So Frank, do you know that in I forget the date, in the 1970s, a lawyer at University of Southern California wrote one of the seminal articles titled, "Do Trees Have Standing?"
I'm familiar with the Dr. Seuss part. and that was used. No, seriously though. But it's what you're talking about, but more modern. So like in 2016, 2018, maybe 2018, the Fourth Circuit that's over Virginia, there was a pipeline project and somebody wanted an EIS or whatever, they wanted something done. And so when it was first going, it was in a national park and the Park Service or whoever was there arguing the environmental protection stuff. And then the Trump administration took over. And all of a sudden, all of the objections that had been previously submitted by the Park Service or whoever had been withdrawn. And the court said that was very suspect and then cited to Dr. Seuss and the Lorax and said, "Who will speak for the trees?"
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Great.
so I cited to that in my complaint in tribal court because I knew that it was going to end up being used in federal court. You know?
Very smart. Yeah.
Right. So I know what you're talking about. Right.
Too bad you didn't quote Big Bird.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, Big Bird came after me, so I don't know Big Bird as well as a lot of your grandchildren.
Okay, Ann, take us home.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bibeau. That was really wonderful. We are jealous of your mom for having a son like you. And yeah, we really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for coming. And everyone, thank you so much for joining the call. We're going to have to pick up on our conversation we started about our solidarity events, but what I would ask is to not just think about the issues, but think about the specifics. What could we do around those particular issues? Because some of those ideas were fairly early in the year, so we need to get going on the actual planning. So as we head towards Thanksgiving, we're grateful for all of our WILPF sisters and brothers and this community of like-minded peace people working for change. Stay right where you are to participate in the soapbox, which will probably be brief tonight if we have one. Our next One WILPF call is scheduled for Thursday, December 9th. We're looking forward to working on the Solidarity Action Planning and also the Plowshares Grant Project and lots more important work. Have a wonderful holiday and do incorporate some remembrance of the real history of Thanksgiving and its racist underpinnings. So let's all unmute to say good night. And if you like, remain for the soapbox segment.
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good
night,
everybody.
Turkey Day. Good night. Happy Indigenous Day.
Yeah, Monty.
Happy Truthsgiving.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for this gathering.
Thank you.
Right. This was quite a meeting.